have been driving for Uber and Lyft in the greater Atlanta area since the spring of 2018. When you do this job full-time, especially the overnight weekend shifts, you quickly learn that a high-quality dashcam is the single most important investment you can make. I bought a top-of-the-line dual-channel camera that mounts directly behind my rearview mirror. It records the road ahead, but more importantly, it has an inward-facing lens equipped with infrared night vision that records the entire cabin in crystal-clear 1080p, even in pitch darkness. It also records high-fidelity audio. The camera is strictly a liability safeguard. I bought it to protect myself against false reports from drunk passengers trying to score a free ride, or in the worst-case scenario, an attempted carjacking. For nearly 3 years, I never had a reason to pull the micro SD card out of the device. Most of my nights consisted of ferrying exhausted bartenders home or driving college students back to their dorms. The job was mundane, predictable, and mostly boring. I never imagined that the piece of technology I bought to protect myself would end up capturing the most deeply terrifying experience of my life, or that it would reveal just how fragile my sense of safety actually was. It was a late Thursday night in mid-October. The weather was unusually cold for Georgia, accompanied by a thick, oppressive fog that had rolled in around midnight, severely cutting down visibility on the roads. By 2:15 a.m., the city had completely died down. I had been driving for 8 hours and was just about to tap the go offline button and head home to my townhouse in Smyrna when a ping came through. It was a 15-minute pickup for a passenger named Chris, located in a heavily wooded, affluent residential area near Sandy Springs. The drop-off was a commercial district about 20 minutes south. The surge pricing was high enough that I decided to take one last ride before calling it a night. I navigated my Honda CR-V through the winding, tree-lined suburban roads, relying heavily on my GPS as the fog reflected my headlights back at me. The pickup location wasn't a house. It was a dark, gravel pull-off area near the entrance to a closed municipal nature preserve. There were no streetlights, just the towering silhouettes of Georgia pines. As I pulled into the gravel lot, my headlights washed over a single figure standing at the edge of the tree line. It was a man wearing a dark, oversized hooded sweatshirt and a surgical mask, which wasn't entirely uncommon for passengers, but still naturally put me on edge. I put the car in park and unlocked the doors. Instead of immediately walking to the rear passenger door like most people do, the man walked around the front of my SUV and approached my driver's side window. He tapped lightly on the glass. I rolled it down about 2 inches, keeping the engine running. "Are you for Chris?" he asked. His voice was muffled through the mask, but he sounded completely normal. I confirmed his name, and he nodded, thanking me for coming all the way out there. He engaged me in a brief, seemingly polite conversation through the crack in the window, complaining about the cold and asking how my night was going. He stood there for maybe 15 or 20 seconds, keeping my full attention focused on him out the left side of my vehicle. While I was focused on Chris at the driver's side window, the low hum of the engine and the gravel crunch beneath his shoes masked almost everything else. The interior of the car was completely dark, and from my angle, the opposite side of the vehicle might as well have not existed. Finally, he pulled his hood back slightly, walked around the back of the SUV, and opened the rear passenger side door. He slid into the back seat, pulled the door shut with a solid thud, and buckled his seatbelt. I greeted him via the rearview mirror, but he just nodded, pulled out his phone, and stared down at the screen. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the dark gravel lot. The ride was 25 minutes long and entirely silent. The interior of my car was pitch black, illuminated only by the soft glow of the GPS screen on my dashboard. Chris didn't say a single word. He just sat in the back right seat, his face bathed in the blue light of his smartphone. Looking back, the silence wasn't normal. It was controlled. Chris wasn't just being quiet. He was making sure I stayed calm, focused on the road, completely unaware that anything was wrong. I listened to a low-volume sports radio station, focusing entirely on navigating the dense fog on the highway. I dropped him off at a 24-hour laundromat in a strip mall just outside of Decatur. He unbuckled his seatbelt, muttered a quick thanks, and got out. I watched him walk toward the glow of the storefront. Then I finally swiped to end my shift. I was completely exhausted. I drove the remaining 20 minutes back to my own townhouse in Smyrna. I parked in my narrow, detached garage, gathered my empty thermos and jacket, locked the CRV, and went inside to sleep. It was just a perfectly ordinary, quiet end to a long shift. I woke up the next afternoon, around 1 p.m. As I sat at my kitchen island drinking coffee, I opened the Uber driver app to check my earnings from the previous night. At the top of the screen, a glaring red banner immediately caught my attention. Account under review. My stomach dropped. I clicked the notification and found a generic message from safety support stating that a passenger from my previous shift had reported me for making severe threats and brandishing a weapon during the ride. My account was temporarily suspended pending an investigation. I was furious. I knew exactly who it was. The final passenger, Chris, was attempting a classic, albeit extreme, refund scam. People occasionally make up horrific lies to get out of paying a $40 fare, completely disregarding the fact that it destroys the driver's livelihood. But I wasn't worried. I had the dash cam. I knew the camera had recorded the entire 25-minute ride in absolute silence, completely disproving his fabricated story. I grabbed my keys, walked out to my garage, and popped the micro SD card out of the camera module. I brought it back inside, slid it into the side of my laptop, and opened the video files. The camera automatically breaks recordings into 3-minute, easily searchable clips. I found the block of files time-stamped around 2:15 a.m. and opened the dual-view video player, which shows the road-facing camera and the cabin-facing camera side by side. I clicked play on the moment I pulled into the dark gravel lot in Sandy Springs. On the right side of my laptop screen, the infrared cabin camera showed the interior of my empty CRV in a crisp, eerie black and white. Because of the infrared lens, everything in the dark car was clearly visible. I watched the footage as my past self rolled the driver's side window down to talk to Chris. I watched myself turn my head to the left, looking out the window, completely engaged in his polite small talk. And then, my blood ran completely cold. While Chris was standing at my driver's window, distracting me, the video captured the rear passenger side door on the completely opposite side of the vehicle, slowly and silently clicking open. The door opened just a few inches. A second man, dressed entirely in black, slid through the narrow gap like a liquid shadow. He didn't climb in like a normal person. He moved slowly and deliberately, using the shadows and the angle of the open door to keep his entire body below the line of the windows. From where I was sitting, even if I had glanced over, I wouldn't have seen anything. He didn't sit on the seats. He dropped directly onto the floorboards behind my front passenger seat, pressing his body completely flat against the floor mats. Because my front seat was pushed relatively far back, The footwell created a deep, dark well that was entirely invisible from the rearview mirror. A second later, Chris finished his conversation at my window, walked around the back of the SUV, and opened the exact same door the intruder had just used. Chris climbed in, placing his heavy boots mere inches from the second man's head, and slammed the door shut. I sat at my kitchen table, completely paralyzed, watching the footage continue. For the entire 25-minute drive to Decatur, I was not alone with Chris. The infrared camera clearly showed the second man lying absolutely motionless on the floorboards, his face glowing a pale, ghostly white in the night vision. He was staring straight up at the ceiling of my car. In his right hand, resting across his chest, he was holding a long, dark object that looked like a heavy screwdriver or a pry bar. I watched my past self driving, bobbing my head to the radio, completely oblivious to the fact that a man was lying in the dark less than 2 feet away from my neck. My mind raced, trying to understand what I was watching. Why didn't he attack me? Was it a botched carjacking? Did I take a route that threw off their plan? I fast-forwarded the video to the drop-off in Decatur. I watched Chris unbuckle his seatbelt, say thanks, and step out of the car. He closed the door. I watched myself put the car in drive and pull out of the strip mall. The breath caught in my throat. The second man had not gotten out. He was still lying flat on the floorboards. Chris wasn't the target. He was a Trojan horse. He had used his legitimate rideshare account to deliberately smuggle a second, untraceable person into my vehicle. And I had just driven that person directly to my own home. My hands were shaking so violently, I could barely control the laptop trackpad. I clicked the final video file, time-stamped at 3:10 a.m. The footage showed my car pulling into my dark, detached garage. I watched myself turn off the ignition, plunge the car into darkness, grab my thermos, and exit the vehicle. The heavy garage door rumbled shut behind me. The garage door motor was loud, and once it shut, the space became completely sealed off from the outside world. With the engine off and the walls enclosing the sound, even small movements inside the car would have been muffled enough that I never would have heard them from inside the house. The video continued. For 8 agonizing minutes, the interior of the car remained perfectly still. The man on the floorboards didn't move a single muscle. He just waited, ensuring I was inside my house and asleep. Finally, at 3:18 a.m., the man slowly sat up in the pitch-black car. The infrared camera caught his face clearly. His eyes were wide, scanning the interior of my garage through the car windows. He reached up, unlocked the rear door, and quietly slipped out of the vehicle. I didn't watch anymore. I slammed the laptop shut, grabbed a heavy kitchen knife from the butcher block, and dialed 911. I backed myself into the corner of my living room, my eyes glued to the front door, waiting for the police to arrive. When the officers cleared my property, they found the side access door to my detached garage had been forced open with a pry bar. The man was gone. He hadn't tried to break into my main townhouse. He had simply let himself out into my neighborhood. When I showed the police the dashcam footage, a senior detective explained the horrifying reality of what had happened. It was a highly organized, terrifyingly efficient burglary ring targeting affluent suburbs. They knew rideshare drivers went home to residential neighborhoods at the end of their shifts. They used the driver as a free, completely blind transport vehicle to bypass gated communities and wealthy neighborhood security patrols. The man was supposed to ride in my car until I parked for the night, slip out, and burgle the surrounding houses in my neighborhood while the residents slept, leaving absolutely no vehicle trail for the police to track. The only reason Chris had filed the fake safety report the next morning was to get his account suspended and deleted, erasing the credit card and burner phone data connected to the ride before I could figure it out. I handed the footage over to the police, and Uber permanently banned the account. But the men were never caught. I quit driving for rideshare companies the very next day. I sold my CRV to a used car lot less than a week later because I couldn't stomach the thought of ever sitting in the driver's seat again. To this day, whenever I get into my new car at night, I turn on the overhead cabin lights and physically check the floorboards in the back, terrified of finding a pale face staring back up at me in the dark. What I can't get out of my head isn't the footage itself. It's the realization that for those 25 minutes, my life was entirely in the hands of someone who had already decided I wasn't the target.